she's just a fat pig in white. How romantic. That's what my soon-to-be son-in-law, Logan, whispered to his groomsmen. And I heard every word through the thin church hallway. I stood there, frozen, clutching the bouquet Melissa asked me to hold. My ears burned, my fingers trembled. The corsage pinned to my chest felt like a stone. He laughed after he said it, a short, cruel laugh. And the other man joined in, like it was nothing. Like my daughter's heart wouldn't shatter if she knew. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed and share where you're listening from. We love knowing how far these stories reach. Melissa had asked me to check on the decorations one last time. She was upstairs, nervously adjusting her dress, her hands shaking as she pulled at the delicate sleeves. "Do I look okay, Mama?" she'd asked earlier, her voice cracking. "You look like a dream," I'd said, and I meant it. She wasn't thin, no, but she glowed. Her smile was pure. She was love itself. And now I stood there, hearing the man she was about to marry mock her body, her vulnerability, as if she were a joke, a punchline in his locker room humor. I didn't move, not yet. I didn't rush in and slap him or scream. I just stood there thinking, how long has he talked about her like this, and why didn't I see it before? I walked back into the church hall like nothing had happened, at least on the outside. Inside, I was burning. Melissa was adjusting her veil in the mirror, a look of pure, nervous joy on her face. "Is everything okay out there?" she asked, not turning. Her voice was soft, almost childlike. I wanted to lie. I needed to lie. But something inside me, a bone-deep ache I hadn't felt since her father died, made me walk slower. I stood behind her, looking at her through the reflection. "Everything's set," I managed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Logan hasn't seen me yet, right?" she asked, her eyes wide with hope. "He said he wanted it to be a surprise. Said he loves when I wear white." My throat closed. I could still hear his voice in my head. "Fat pig in white." I nodded instead of speaking. My hand settled gently on her shoulder. She leaned into the touch, like she had when she was 5, when she got scared during thunderstorms and crawled into bed beside me. "Thank you for everything, Mama," she said, her eyes misting. "You've done so much. I'm sorry I've been so stressed lately." "I'll always be here, baby," I whispered. And I meant it, even if it broke me, even if I had to watch her walk into a lie. That night before the wedding, while Melissa slept upstairs in her childhood room, I sat alone in the kitchen. The same table where I once cut her sandwiches into hearts. The same clock ticking on the wall, slower now. Or maybe I was just too tired to keep time. I opened my wallet, not sure why. Habit, maybe. Or pain, looking for somewhere to settle. Tucked inside the folds was a photo from a trip we took when Melissa was 11. Her standing in a swimsuit she hated, grinning, sunburned, arms around my neck. Her cheeks were chubby even then. She used to cry about it, but she was my girl. And I always told her, the world doesn't get to define you, love does. And now, that same girl was marrying a man who saw her as a joke. I should have said something sooner, when he first mocked her cooking, when he teased her in front of friends, when he said, "You're lucky I like thick girls," and tried to pass it off as affection. But every time Melissa would laugh it off, nervously, and say, "That's just how he is." And I wanted her to feel loved so badly. I said nothing. I convinced myself it wasn't my place. Now I looked at that photo and whispered, "I should have protected you better." The faucet dripped once, then again. Even the house seemed to agree. The morning sun crept in through the blinds, casting long lines across the hardwood floor. I hadn't slept. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, untouched. I sat at the table staring at the sugar bowl. The silence before a storm. When Logan came in, he looked surprised to see me awake. "Didn't know you were up," he said, reaching into the fridge like this was just another Saturday. He was already in his pressed shirt, cufflinks glinting in the morning light. I stood. "We need to talk." He closed the fridge slowly, milk carton in hand. Can this wait? No, I said, my voice steady, almost eerily so. I heard what you said yesterday, in the hallway. For a split second, his face dropped, not with guilt, but calculation. Then just as quickly he smiled, a fake, practiced thing. You must have misheard, Carolyn. I didn't. He set the milk down, sighed like I was being unreasonable. It was a joke, just guy talk. Come on, don't ruin her day over something like that. I stepped forward, eyes locked on his. You don't get to decide what ruins her day, Logan. You already did. His smile faltered. I won't stop the wedding, I said. But if you ever humiliate my daughter again, you'll see just how dangerous a mother's silence has been. For the first time, he didn't have a clever reply. He just walked away. Later that morning, I helped Melissa into her gown. The same dress she'd bought a year ago when they first got engaged. Long before the stress eating, before the nights she cried alone in her apartment while Logan stayed out with clients. It's a little tighter than I remember, she said, tugging at the sides, her voice thin. I knelt behind her, zipping it gently. It clung a little too close to her waist. You're beautiful, I said, smoothing the fabric over her hips. And she was, not in the polished magazine kind of way, but in the way only a mother can see. A body that had carried joy and sorrow, soft with tenderness, marked with resilience. Melissa turned to the side, inspecting her figure in the mirror. Do you think Logan will still like it? I hesitated, she noticed. He said something, didn't he? I wanted to lie. I wanted to say no, but my silence spoke first. Mama, I looked at her. He's not the man you think he is. Her lip trembled. But I love him. Loving someone who doesn't respect you isn't love. It's sacrifice, and not the good kind. She sat on the bed, the dress bunching awkwardly. I don't want to be alone again. I knelt beside her, placing that old photo, the one from the beach, in her hand. You've never been alone, not with me here. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't speak. Not yet. As we waited for the limo, I stepped into Melissa's old room one last time. Everything looked untouched. The lavender walls, the corkboard with faded concert tickets, even the stuffed bear her father gave her when she got her first period. It still sat on the shelf, threadbare but intact. I sat on her bed and dialed the only voicemail I've kept saved for over a decade, my husband's. His voice came through, crackling, warm. Hey, sweetheart, just calling to say I love you. Tell Melissa to stop leaving the fridge open. The milk's going bad. I'll be home by 7. I closed my eyes and let his voice wash over me. I wish you were here, I whispered. She's marrying someone who doesn't see her, not really. I try to raise her strong, but I think she's too tired to fight anymore. The line went dead. I sat in silence, the air thick with dust and memory. Her father had adored her. He once told her, anyone who makes you feel small doesn't deserve to stand beside you. She'd forgotten that. And maybe I had too. Downstairs, the doorbell rang. The limo. I stood slowly, pocketed the phone, and straightened my spine. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because I'd remembered something Logan hadn't. A mother might bend for her daughter, but she never breaks. The church was warm, filled with murmurs and flowers that smelled like too much sweetness. I walked beside Melissa, my arm looped through hers as we made our way down the aisle. She looked straight ahead, but I could feel her pulse fluttering through my skin. Every step echoed louder than the last, as if the carpet itself were questioning the path. Guests smiled, phones lifted, flash after flash. But I wasn't watching them. I was watching Logan. He stood at the altar, polished like a mannequin, that same smirk curling at the edges of his mouth. The one that always felt just slightly wrong, even before I knew the truth. He wasn't looking at Melissa. He was adjusting his cufflink, barely glancing up. I squeezed her hand. She whispered, Mama, I feel sick. I paused, just for a moment, and leaned in. You can stop this, baby. Right now. I'll walk you out the back door, no questions asked. She blinked, surprised. Then her eyes filled with water. Not tears of joy, but of fear, of exhaustion, of a woman too tired to pretend anymore. "I can't," she said, her voice cracking. "Everyone's here." I looked around. The guests, the flowers, the performance. Then I looked back at her. "You don't owe them anything," I whispered. "But you owe yourself everything." And right there, at the halfway mark to the altar, my daughter stopped walking. The church went silent. All she said was, "I need a moment." We slipped into a side corridor, Melissa gripping my hand like a lifeline. Her veil brushed against the peeling white paint of the church wall as she gasped for air. "God," she whispered. "I can't breathe." "You're not weak," I said, placing both hands on her shoulders. "You're finally waking up." She slumped onto a wooden bench meant for extra chairs, trembling. "What if I'm making a mistake? What if I regret it later?" I crouched down in front of her. "Let me tell you something I've never said before." She looked up, eyes wide and scared. "I stayed with your father longer than I should have. Not because he was cruel, he wasn't, but because I was afraid to start over. I thought my silence was noble. But you know what silence does?" She shook her head slowly. "It teaches people how to treat you. It says, 'This is what I'll accept.'" I took her hand. "If you say yes today, that becomes your silence. And he'll fill it however he wants." Melissa swallowed hard. Her lipstick had smudged slightly. She wiped it with the back of her hand, like a little girl trying to clean her face after crying. The church organ began playing, the cue to return. She stood, not shaking this time. Then she asked almost in a whisper, "Can I leave through the back?" I nodded. She took off her shoes, held them in one hand, and walked barefoot down the corridor. We found a small Sunday school room tucked behind the choir loft, dusty and unused. Melissa collapsed onto a child-sized chair, the lace of her gown pooling like spilled cream around her feet. She looked at me and laughed. Not a joyful laugh, but one edged with panic. "I ran out of my own wedding." "You walked away," I corrected, sitting beside her. "There's a difference." Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. "I can already hear Aunt Jean saying I humiliated the whole family, that I'm overreacting, that women before me didn't have the luxury to be this dramatic." I let the silence hold her words. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out a paper napkin, the only tissue I had. She took it and dabbed under her eyes. "Do you think I'll always feel this ashamed?" I shook my head. "Shame isn't yours to carry, Melissa. That man mocked you in secret. What you feel is grief, for the dream, for the version of him you thought you loved." She looked down at her bare feet. "I wanted to believe he loved me for who I am." I gently lifted her chin. "He doesn't even love who he is. Don't take that on." We sat in that tiny room, the hum of the organ distant now. For the first time that day, my daughter cried, not for him, but for herself. And I let her, because this time I wouldn't silence her pain. A knock at the door. Melissa stiffened. Her mascara streaked faintly and she quickly wiped at her face. They found me. I stood and cracked the door open. It was the wedding coordinator, flustered, clipboard shaking in her hands. "Is she okay? The guests are getting restless. Logan is, well, he's asking questions." "I'm sure he is," I said calmly. I can stall a few more minutes, but then..." "She's not coming," I said. The woman's eyes widened. "She's not. She needs space. She's safe. That's all your job requires." I shut the door before she could say anything else. Melissa was still sitting, hands knotted in her lap. "Did you mean that?" she asked. "About not going back?" I walked over and knelt beside her again. "You don't need an altar to stand tall. You're standing right now." Her mouth opened, then closed. She let out a slow breath. "If I don't go out there, will people hate me?" "Some might," I said honestly, "but others will wish they had your courage." She looked at me, something shifting in her eyes. "Resolve." a trembling seed of power. "Will you go out there?" she asked. "And tell them for me?" I nodded. "What should I say?" Melissa reached for my hand, squeezed it tight and said, "Tell them I had the courage to choose myself. Finally." The words wrapped around my chest like a ribbon, and I knew what I had to do. I walked back into the chapel, alone. The music had stopped. The chatter had turned into whispers. Dozens of eyes fell on me. The mother of the bride without the bride. Logan stood at the altar, his smile gone, jaw clenched. He stepped forward as I approached, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "What the hell is going on?" I met his glare, calm and steady. "She's not coming." His face twisted. "This is a joke, right? She heard the truth, and she's not willing to be disrespected before vows that mean nothing to you." Gasps rippled behind us. I didn't care. "You just humiliated me," he hissed. "No," I said, my voice firm. "You did that to yourself the moment you called her a pig." The silence became deeper. A few guests turned toward each other, lips parting in disbelief. Logan's face turned red. "You'll regret this." "I already regretted not stopping this sooner." I turned to the crowd, lifting my chin. Melissa won't be coming down the aisle today. She made the choice every mother prays her daughter has the strength to make, to walk away from someone who cannot love her as she deserves. The air was still. Nobody clapped. Nobody booed. But in the back, someone whispered, "Good for her," and that was enough. I left the church not with a bouquet, but with my daughter's dignity in both hands. We drove in my car, just the two of us. Her gown bunched in the passenger seat, windows rolled down to let the October breeze blow through the tension. Neither of us spoke at first. We were exhausted, not from the day, but from years of pretending. Then Melissa let out a laugh. Not the brittle kind, a real one. "God, I ran out of a church in a wedding dress," she said, laughing harder now. "I'm someone's story at brunch tomorrow." I glanced over, smiling. "Let them talk. You wrote a better story today." She wiped her eyes, this time from laughter. "I should be crying, shouldn't I? You already did. Now you're breathing." We stopped at a red light, and she looked at me, suddenly serious. "I thought I was unlovable, Mama. That no one else would ever look at me and see anything beautiful." I reached for her hand. "He tried to make you small because he was afraid of your worth. You're not hard to love, Melissa. You just got too used to crumbs." Her shoulders sank. "I don't want to go home yet." "You don't have to." We ended up at the lake, where her father used to fish on Sundays. The water shimmered under a pale sun. She took off her heels and stepped into the cold shallows, dress and all. For the first time in years, I saw my daughter smile without permission. She looked free. Later that evening, Melissa's phone buzzed on the dashboard. She stared at it, the screen lighting up with Logan's name. For a long time, she didn't move, just watched it vibrate like something alive, desperate, insistent. "You don't have to answer," I said quietly, but she did. She slid her finger across the screen, held the phone to her ear, and didn't say a word. "Melissa?" Logan's voice was low, coaxing. "Baby, I don't know what your mom told you, but this is out of control. Come back. Let's talk. We can work through this." Her eyes filled, not with longing, but with clarity. "You called me a fat pig," she said. A pause. "That was a joke. Come on, you know I didn't mean it." "You did. You meant it enough to say it when you thought I couldn't hear." "Melissa, please," he said, the charm slipping into panic. "Do you know how this makes me look?" She let that hang. Then she whispered, "Exactly," and hung up. She placed the phone face down on the dashboard, breathing hard. I reached over and stroked her hair like I used to when she was sick. "That was brave." "I thought it'd break me," she said. But it didn't. It felt like air coming back into my lungs. We sat in the silence that followed. Not heavy, not sad, just real. That night we returned home to a kitchen full of leftovers from a wedding that never happened. Tiered cake boxes, shrimp trays, untouched wine bottles, all laid out like a celebration waiting for someone to lie to. Melissa stared at the cake. He insisted on lemon. I hate lemon. I handed her a fork. Then let's eat the frosting. We sat at the counter in our robes, peeling off the sugared flowers and laughing at the absurdity of it all. She smeared a little on her nose and looked at me, her eyes still rimmed in pink but shining with life. I thought today would be the beginning of something, she said. It was, I replied. Just not the thing you expected. We toasted with plastic champagne flutes filled with ginger ale. No speeches, no applause, just the clink of two women reclaiming peace. To endings, she said. To beginnings, I answered. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. The silence was warm now, not hollow. Before bed, she pulled a folded napkin from the counter. It had Logan's name printed in gold, the fancy kind. She scribbled something on the back with a pen from the junk drawer. What is that? I asked. A note I'll never send, she said, smiling softly. I didn't ask what it said. Some goodbyes don't need to be heard to matter. The next morning, I found her in the laundry room holding the dress. It was still crumpled from yesterday, the hem damp with lake water, a tear near the sleeve where she'd pulled too hard getting out of it. She didn't say anything, just ran her fingers across the fabric, slowly, like she was trying to read it in Braille. I don't know what to do with it, she finally said. You don't have to decide today. She looked at me, her voice smaller. Do you think I ruined everything? No, I said. You saved yourself. Melissa hung the dress in the back of the closet, behind old coats and Christmas sweaters, out of sight but not thrown away. Then she pulled out a cardigan her father used to wear. Oversized, beige, and pilled at the elbows. She wrapped it around her like armor and sat beside me on the couch. Remember when he used to make pancakes on Saturdays? She asked. With blueberries and too much butter, I smiled. And he'd sing Sinatra. We sat there, wrapped in old fabric and older memories, as the weight of the past 24 hours settled. She didn't need to wear white to prove anything. She didn't need a ring to be whole. What she needed, she'd finally found in herself. And in this quiet house, where love didn't have to be proven, only felt. The dress would stay in the dark for now, but she was stepping back into the light. 3 days later, we were at the grocery store picking up milk and bread, the ordinary kind of errand that feels oddly sacred after life explodes. Melissa walked beside me, hair in a bun, no makeup, wearing her favorite hoodie. A woman passed us by the produce section, eyes flicking toward her. Then came the whisper, "That's the girl who ran out of her wedding." Melissa's back stiffened. She lowered her gaze, reaching for a bag of apples with hands that suddenly trembled. I placed my hand on hers. "Let them talk," I said gently. "But it's true," she murmured. "I ran. I didn't fight." "You didn't run from a fight," I said. "You walked away from disrespect. That's not weakness. That's clarity." She stood straighter, took the apples, and placed them in the cart. We continued down the aisle, but I could feel the shadow still clinging to her. The quiet judgment, the sting of eyes that didn't know the full story. At the checkout, the cashier looked up and smiled. "You're Melissa, right? I just wanted to say, what you did was brave. My sister stayed in a bad marriage for years. I wish she'd walked." Melissa blinked, stunned. "Thank you." As we left, I saw her expression shift, not to pride exactly, but to something close, like a scar she was learning not to hide. Every story spreads, but some become torches, and my daughter had just lit one. That evening, I saw her standing in front of the fridge, staring at the wedding invitation still magneted to the door. Cream cardstock, gold lettering, the smiling photo of her and Logan in the bottom corner, a lie preserved in print. She didn't say anything, just peeled it off slowly, like it might tear if she moved too fast. "I should have seen it sooner," she whispered. "The little things. How he'd roll his eyes when I talked. How he never said sorry. How I laughed at his cruelty just to keep things easy. You weren't blind, I said softly. You were hopeful. She placed the invitation on the table and sat down across from me. I thought love meant compromise, sacrificing little pieces of yourself. It doesn't, I replied. Love doesn't ask for your worth as a deposit. She nodded, tracing her finger over their names on the invite. I feel stupid. No, baby, you feel awake. She took a deep breath, then folded the invitation in half, once, twice, then a third time, until it was small enough to disappear. She didn't shred it. She didn't burn it. Just slipped it into a drawer with expired coupons and takeout menus. A piece of the past, filed away. That night, over leftover pasta and a shared blanket, she said, I think I want to start therapy. I smiled. Not because I'm broken, she added, but because I don't want to go back to sleep. The next morning, I found her at the kitchen table, holding something I hadn't seen in years, her father's old wristwatch. It had stopped working the day he passed, the hands frozen at 2:41 p.m. Melissa had kept it in a shoebox for over a decade, tucked away with sympathy cards and faded photos. I found it when I was looking for the sewing kit, she said, not looking up. It still smells like him. I sat across from her, the sunlight catching the scratched glass of the watch face. He wore that every day for 20 years. I used to love listening to it tick, she said softly, especially when I'd sit on his lap while he read. The sound always calmed me. She turned it over in her palm. I think I kept it because it reminded me that time doesn't stop, even when it feels like it should. I reached out, brushing a piece of hair behind her ear. And maybe now it's time to let it start again. She nodded slowly, then opened the drawer, pulled out a small screwdriver set, and began to unscrew the back of the watch. I want it to work, she said. I want something that belonged to a good man, to move again. It was quiet except for the birds outside and the tiny clicks of her tools. Time hadn't stopped. It had just been waiting for her. A week later, Melissa agreed to come to Sunday dinner at Aunt Jean's house, a tradition that hadn't been missed in over 10 years. The moment we stepped through the door, I felt it. The shift in air, the polite smiles stretched too tight, the clatter of silverware masking curiosity. Melissa wore a simple navy dress and no makeup. She didn't shrink herself, but the judgment started before the soup. So, Aunt Jean said, spooning broth into delicate china bowls, I suppose congratulations aren't in order. Melissa looked up calmly. No, they're not. Jean sniffed. Well, I just hope this wasn't one of those impulsive modern tantrums. We all make sacrifices in marriage. Heaven knows your uncle wasn't a saint. Melissa held her gaze. There's a difference between sacrifice and self-erasure. I reached under the table and squeezed her hand. Uncle Robert cleared his throat. It's just hard for folks to understand, that's all. Everything looked perfect. Melissa tilted her head. Perfect doesn't mean real. Sometimes it's just well-rehearsed pain. The room quieted. Even Aunt Jane had no reply. Melissa picked up her fork again. She didn't flinch. She didn't explain. And in that stillness, something changed. Not in them, maybe, but in her. She no longer needed their approval like oxygen. She had learned something many never do. You can set down the burden of being understood and still walk tall. That night back at home, Melissa pulled a dusty box from the trunk of my car, the one the wedding planner had shoved in hastily after we left the church. Inside was the guest book, white leather, gold trim, still unopened. She sat cross-legged on the living room floor and opened it. Blank pages. Only the first had been touched. A line from a flower girl's mother, written just after arriving. Wishing you both a lifetime of laughter. Melissa traced her finger over the sentence, then flipped through the rest. Empty lines stretched out like unanswered prayers. Kind of poetic, she murmured. An entire book waiting for names that never came. I sat beside her. You still have a lifetime ahead. Doesn't need to be wasted filling pages that don't matter. She closed it slowly. I think I want to use this for something else. Maybe to write down every time I choose myself. I smiled. That would be a much better use. She got up, grabbed a pen from the counter, and on the second page she wrote, October 5th. I said no. I walked away. I lived. She capped the pen, shut the book, and placed it on the shelf. It didn't hold vows or names of strangers anymore. It held something far more sacred. Proof that walking away isn't weakness. It's the first step toward writing your real life. 2 weeks later, on a quiet Tuesday, Melissa folded the wedding dress into a garment bag and asked me to drive her to a local thrift store. She didn't speak much on the way, just looked out the window, fingers toying with the zipper. The radio played softly, some old Bonnie Raitt song about heartbreak and healing. We pulled up to the shop, small, local, tucked between a bakery and a laundromat. Inside, a kind woman with thick glasses and paint-splattered jeans took the bag from Melissa's arms. "You sure you want to donate this?" she asked. Melissa nodded. "Someone else might want to start over in it. I don't need it anymore." The woman smiled, sensing the quiet weight in her voice. "I'll take good care of it. Maybe it'll be part of someone else's beginning." Melissa smiled faintly. "I hope they pick it for love." As we walked out, she stopped at the door, turned back, and looked at the rack of wedding gowns lined against the far wall. Her dress hadn't been placed yet, still in the back, still waiting. But in her eyes, there was no longing, just release. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "That chapter's closed." And I believed her. Because there's a difference between walking away in pain and walking forward in peace. She had finally crossed that line. A few days later, we stopped by the pharmacy for Melissa's vitamins. She was browsing through the shelves when an older woman approached, hesitating with a box of hair dye in her hand. "Excuse me," the woman said gently. "You're Melissa, aren't you?" Melissa turned, cautious. "Yes," the woman smiled. Not judgmental, not pitying, just kind. "I was at the church. I don't know if you saw me. I was sitting near the back." Melissa straightened. "I didn't. I just wanted to say," the woman continued, "I've lived 62 years, and I've seen a lot of women walk into pain with a smile just to keep the peace." She paused, her voice cracking slightly. "You walked out. That was the bravest thing I've seen in a long time." Melissa blinked, her lips parting. "Thank you," she said, barely above a whisper. The woman reached into her purse and handed her a small card, hand-printed with gold roses. "I run a support circle for women. No pressure. Just stories, tea, and no judgment." Melissa looked down at the card for a long time. The woman added softly, "Sometimes the story that shamed us becomes the story that saves someone else." She walked away, leaving behind the faint scent of lavender and something softer, solidarity. Melissa slipped the card into her bag. She didn't say much, but I knew she would go. That evening, as the house settled into its usual quiet hum, Melissa walked into my room holding a small velvet box. "I found it in my purse," she said, setting it on the nightstand. "I didn't even remember packing it." I opened the box slowly. The engagement ring glinted under the lamplight, still flawless, still cold. A perfect lie wrapped in gold. "I don't know what to do with it," she said. "Do you want to keep it?" She shook her head. "No, but I don't want to sell it either. Feels like that would stain whatever comes next." I understood. Some things aren't meant to be destroyed or cashed in. They're meant to be buried, quietly, like grief. Melissa picked it up one last time, rolling it between her fingers. "He said it was timeless," she murmured. "Like our love." I watched her set it back into the box and close it. She walked to her room, opened the top drawer of her nightstand, and placed the box in the very back, behind journals, letters, and a small photo of her as a child. She didn't slam the drawer shut. She didn't cry. She simply let it rest. Later that night, she came into the kitchen with a new notebook. "I'm going to start writing," she said. "Not just about him, about me." I kissed her forehead. "You're already the story," I whispered. "Now you get to be the author." The next morning, I passed by Melissa's bedroom and found the door ajar. The curtains were open wide, letting the soft autumn light spill in. She was standing in front of her full-length mirror, wearing jeans and a plain tank top. No makeup, no posing, no pretense. Just her as she was. She turned to the side and looked at herself, not with the usual frown or forced smile, but with something quieter, a kind of truce. I watched from the doorway, unseen, as she touched her stomach lightly, not pinching, not tugging, just resting her hand there, like it finally belonged to her again. Then she did something I hadn't seen in years. She smiled. Not because someone told her to, not because a photo was being taken, but because she liked what she saw. Later, she told me, I used to look in that mirror and only see what he'd pointed out, my weight, my arms, my thighs. Today I saw my survival. I wanted to cry. Instead, I opened my arms and she folded into them like she used to when she was little, when the world felt too big and I was her whole anchor. You're not just surviving, I whispered. You're coming home to yourself. She pulled back, eyes damp. I didn't know that was allowed. It always was, I said. You just had to unlearn their lies first. That weekend, Melissa asked me to take her picture. Not for a dating profile, not for friends, just for her. We drove to the park where her father used to fly kites with her on Sundays. The trees were gold and amber, the leaves crunching beneath our feet as we searched for the right spot. She wore a simple burgundy sweater and jeans. No filters, no angles, just light and wind, and a woman learning to stand in her own skin. I raised my phone and aimed. Wait, she said, taking a deep breath. Let me smile for me. She closed her eyes, tilted her face toward the sun, and then turned to me, not with a performance, but with presence. I clicked. Then she laughed. One more. I took 5. We sat on a bench afterward, and she scrolled through the photos. Her brows furrowed, then lifted. I look peaceful. You are. She locked her phone and tucked it into her pocket. I used to think love meant someone else making me feel beautiful. I never knew I could do it myself. I took her hand, gave it a gentle squeeze. You've always been beautiful. Now you've just caught up to the truth. Later that night, she printed one of the photos and placed it in the guest book from the wedding. On the opposite page, she wrote, October 12th, I saw myself, and I liked what I saw. A few days later, I found an envelope on the kitchen table. My name, Mom, written in Melissa's handwriting, curved and careful. Inside was a letter. No grand gestures, no dramatics, just her heart placed gently between the lines. I don't know how many times you've saved me without even knowing it, it began. But walking away from that altar, I didn't do that alone. I did it because I had you, your voice, your strength, your love like a lighthouse in a storm I didn't know how to get out of. I stopped reading for a moment, my throat thick. I used to think you were overprotective. Now I know. You were just quietly watching me lose myself. And when it mattered most, you didn't scream or push. You opened a door. She ended it with a line that broke something open inside me. You didn't raise me to be quiet. You just let me learn the sound of my own voice. There were crumbs on the table, leftover toast, the kettle still warm. Ordinary things. But this letter, it was a beginning in ink. I folded it carefully, pressed it to my chest and whispered, You found your way, baby, and you never left mine. Sometimes, the greatest love isn't loud. It's a mother who waits until her daughter is ready to see herself clearly, and then hands her the mirror. A week later, Logan sent an email. Melissa called me into the living room, her laptop open on her knees. He wrote, she said simply. She read it aloud, her voice steady. I'm sorry for how things ended. I was under a lot of pressure. I didn't mean what I said. I hope one day you'll understand that I was just trying to be funny, not hurtful. Wishing you the best. That was it. No ownership, no acknowledgement of the harm, just a polished version of regret dipped in ego. Melissa closed the laptop. He still thinks this is about a moment, not a pattern. I sat beside her, because people like him confuse cruelty with charm. They rewrite history to keep from seeing themselves. She nodded. It almost worked. That's what scares me. A year ago, I would have replied. I would have apologized for making him feel bad. But now, she smiled. Now I see the difference between an apology and a tactic. She didn't write back. Instead, she opened her notebook, the one with her new life scribbled into it, and added a line. October 19th. I received an apology meant to protect his pride, not my heart, and I declined. She closed it, set it on the coffee table, and turned on music, some soft, soulful jazz. The email faded into the background, and so did he. That Sunday, Melissa went to the women's circle, the one she heard about in the pharmacy. She asked me to drop her off, though she could have driven herself. I think I just need the comfort of you nearby, she said, squeezing my hand before getting out. The building was small, nestled between a yoga studio and a florist. A chalkboard outside read, "Come as you are, leave as more." She took a deep breath and walked in. I waited across the street, sipping coffee in the car, watching autumn leaves swirl across the windshield. An hour passed. Then another. When she came out, her eyes were red, but not from sadness. There was light in them, the kind that comes only after release. She got in the car and didn't speak at first. Then, they all had stories. Different details, same pain. One woman stayed with a man who called her worthless for 20 years. Another left a week before her wedding, just like me. One woman said, "The hardest part wasn't leaving, it was forgiving myself for staying." I looked at her gently. "And what did you say?" Melissa smiled. I said, "I still love who I was, even the version that stayed too long." She wanted love. She just didn't know what it looked like yet. We drove home in silence. But it was a silence filled with healing. That day she learned she wasn't alone, and neither were the others. That evening I noticed something quiet, almost poetic. Melissa's wedding shoes, ivory satin, never worn past the church hallway, were no longer by the door. For weeks they'd sat there untouched, a pair of promises never kept, collecting dust as if waiting for a different ending. Now, gone. I found her in the garage, gently placing them into a donation bag. Around her, other things she once held on to too tightly. Picture frames, decorative pillows with his favorite sayings, the wine glasses they'd registered for. She looked up, smiling. I thought I had to keep these, that maybe letting go would mean I was bitter. And now? Now I know letting go is just clearing space for peace. She tied the bag shut with firm, quiet hands. I watched her move, not rushed, not angry, just deliberate. A woman no longer drowning in sentiment. Later, as we made tea, I asked, "What changed today?" She stirred her cup. One of the women in the circle said something that stuck. "Healing isn't loud. Sometimes it just looks like putting the right things away." That night, the entryway looked cleaner. But more than that, it felt lighter. There was room again, not for someone else, but for her. And in that simple absence of two unused shoes, I saw something powerful. She was no longer waiting to be chosen. She was choosing herself, step by step. A few nights later, we were doing dishes when Melissa suddenly stopped, tilted her head and said, "Do you hear that?" The radio was playing softly in the background, an old Etta James song. She leaned against the counter, eyes distant. He used to hate this song, said it was too slow. I turned the volume up. She swayed slightly, absent-mindedly, the soap still on her hands. "I used to listen to this when he wasn't home," she said. Would close my eyes and imagine someone dancing with me in the kitchen, just because. She turned to me then, a little embarrassed. I forgot how much I loved this song. How many things I stopped doing just to avoid his comments. I dried my hands and took hers. "May I have this dance?" I asked with a smile. She laughed, shook her head, and nodded all at once. So we danced. Two barefoot women in a quiet kitchen, spinning slowly between the table and the sink, the overhead light casting soft shadows on the floor. She closed her eyes and rested her head on my shoulder. "This," she whispered, "feels like love." It is. No performance, no judgment, no need to be thinner, quieter, or anything other than exactly who she was. She didn't need a wedding for this kind of joy. She just needed the music of her own life turned back up. A few days later, Melissa came into my room holding a small velvet pouch. "I found this in the bottom of my sock drawer," she said. "Dad gave it to me on my 16th birthday. I hadn't worn it in years." She opened it carefully. Inside was a silver necklace with a tiny heart-shaped pendant. Simple, elegant, unassuming, like her. "I used to wear it every day," she said, "until Logan told me it looked childish. So I stopped. I sat down on the bed. It was never the necklace he had a problem with, sweetheart." "I know," she said, nodding slowly. "He didn't like anything that reminded me of who I was before him." She walked over to the mirror and fastened it around her neck. The clasp was a little stiff, but her fingers didn't shake. She turned to me, the pendant resting just above her collarbone. "It's funny. I feel stronger with this on than I ever did with that engagement ring. Because this came from someone who loved you without condition," I said. She smiled. "I want to wear it every day again, not because it's fancy, but because it came from a man who saw me as more than enough." The silver caught the sunlight and shimmered. Not loud, not flashy, just quietly true. And in that reflection, I saw the girl I once raised returning home to herself, one memory at a time. That Friday night, I walked into the kitchen and smelled garlic and rosemary, rich and warm, filling every corner of the house. Melissa stood at the stove, apron tied loosely at her waist, stirring a pot with a soft hum under her breath. She didn't hear me at first. "Smells amazing," I said, setting down my book. She turned, cheeks flushed from the heat, smiling. "I made chicken with lemon and roasted vegetables." I raised an eyebrow. She grinned. "I know, lemon. But this time it's mine." She set the table with mismatched plates, ones she used to keep tucked away for guests. Tonight, they were for her. When we sat down, she served herself first, slowly, deliberately. "You know," she said between bites, "I used to cook meals just to impress him. And he'd always have something to say. Too salty, too dry, or, 'You really shouldn't eat that.'" She looked at her plate. "But this is for me. Made with what I love, how I love it." I watched her eat with something close to reverence. Not rushing, not shrinking. She poured herself a glass of wine. "I think this might be the first real dinner I've cooked for myself. No performance, no audience." I lifted my glass. "To flavor and freedom." She laughed, clinking hers against mine. That night, nourishment tasted different. Not just of garlic and rosemary, but of choice. Of a woman learning she never needed permission to savor her own life. The next morning, Melissa opened her email to find a message from someone she didn't know. The subject line read, "Thank you for your courage." She hesitated before clicking it. "Hi, Melissa," it began. "You don't know me, but I was at the church that day. I was one of the vendors, the florist. I watched you walk away in silence, head high, and I haven't stopped thinking about it since." The message went on. "I was married to a man like that for 12 years. I stayed because I was afraid of the noise walking away would make. But watching you, something shifted in me. I left 2 weeks ago. I'm scared, but I'm free." Melissa read the message twice, then a third time. Her eyes filled. I looked over her shoulder, placing a hand on her back. "You didn't just change your life, baby. You gave someone else permission to change theirs." She nodded slowly, lips trembling. Later that day, she replied, "Thank you for writing. I didn't feel brave at the time. I felt broken. But your message reminded me that sometimes the break is where the light gets in. I'm proud of you. Please keep walking forward. I'll be walking too." She pressed send, and something settled in her. Not pride, not ego, but purpose. She was no longer just surviving her pain. She was helping others survive theirs. That Monday afternoon, a thick white envelope arrived in the mail, addressed to Melissa. She opened it at the kitchen table, carefully slicing it open with her nail. Inside, the canceled marriage license. No fanfare, no apology, just bureaucratic finality stamped in black ink. She stared at it for a long time. "This was supposed to make me feel sad," she said, placing the papers down. "But it feels like breath, like something just unwrapped inside my chest." I nodded. "Closure doesn't always come with tears. Sometimes it comes with silence." She folded the license, placed it in the same drawer where she'd hidden the ring box, and said softly, "I think I want to take a trip. Just for me." "Where?" "I don't know yet." She smiled. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I can remember who I am without all the noise." I felt a lump rise in my throat. Pride, relief, maybe even a touch of grief for the little girl who once needed me for everything. "You'll come back," I whispered. "Different," she said. "But yes, and more myself than I've ever been." That evening, she sat by the window with her journal, writing under the fading golden light. And I watched her, not as someone who'd been abandoned or broken, but as someone reborn. The papers had arrived, and with them, peace. 2 days later, I found Melissa in the hallway, pulling out an old suitcase from the closet. The same one her father took on business trips, its leather corners scuffed with years. She opened it slowly, as if it might speak. Then carefully she began packing. Not dresses or high heels, but walking shoes, a journal, a camera, her favorite cardigan, and a book she'd never finished. "No flights yet?" I asked. She smiled. "Nope. I just want to be ready when I know." She folded a scarf and added it to the bag. "It's not about where I'm going. It's about moving after all that stillness." I sat on the edge of the bed, watching her. She zipped the bag shut and rested her hand on top of it. I used to pack to impress, for him. Tight clothes, heels I hated, makeup I'd sweat off. She looked up at me, eyes soft. "This is the first time I'm packing to feel free." I reached over and touched the suitcase. "You don't need a map," I said. "You've already found your direction." She laughed. "I just hope they let me bring this on the plane. It smells like Dad's cologne." We both smiled. It did. She placed the suitcase by the front door, and for the first time in months, there was something there, waiting not to be escaped, but to be embraced. That afternoon, Melissa wandered into the backyard, barefoot, coffee in hand, and paused near the small plot of soil by the fence. She knelt down slowly, brushing away dry leaves. Underneath, tiny green shoots had begun pushing through. "I forgot about these," she said as I joined her. "I planted tulip bulbs months ago, before everything." She touched one gently as if it might bruise. "I didn't think they'd come up," I smiled. "They were resting, waiting for the right time." She sat back on her heels, eyes misty. "They survived the frost." "You did too." She let that settle. "I was so scared to be alone," she whispered. "But I think what I really feared was being with myself. And now, I'm not afraid anymore. I like her, the woman I'm becoming." A breeze passed through, soft and cool. The shoots trembled but stood. Melissa looked at me. "I want to be like these." Growing quietly, no performance, just real roots. I knelt beside her, placing my hand on hers. "You already are." She closed her eyes and tilted her face to the sun. The garden didn't bloom all at once, but it was beginning, and so was she. That night after dinner, Melissa opened her laptop and pulled up a blank email. The address was already filled in, LoganDReynolds@email.com. She stared at the blinking cursor for a long time. Then she began to type. "I don't need your apology anymore. I don't need answers. I don't need anything from you." She paused. "I thought closure came from other people. I was wrong." It comes from within, from choosing not to let someone's weakness become your story. Another pause. You once told me I should be grateful to be loved by someone like you. But the truth is, I've only now started to feel what real love is. And it has nothing to do with flattery or shame. She hovered over the send button, then deleted the entire draft. Word by word, line by line, gone. She closed the laptop. I thought I needed to say something, she told me. But I don't. Silence is my answer. I nodded. Sometimes the loudest thing you can say is nothing. She curled up next to me on the couch, her head on my shoulder, a blanket wrapped around her legs. And in that quiet, I felt it. Not the absence of anger, but the presence of peace. She didn't need to win the last word. She had already won something much greater. Herself. That night, long after the dishes were done and the lights turned low, I passed by Melissa's room. Her door was ajar. The window was open, the curtain breathing gently in the breeze. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, and a soft hush filled the air. She was asleep, finally deeply, her journal resting on her chest, one hand curled around the necklace her father gave her. I stepped closer, careful not to wake her. On her nightstand was a single slip of paper, folded once. I recognized the handwriting before I even read it. October 28th. I am no longer waiting for a better version of me. I am her. I stood there for a while, just watching. No nightmares, no restless tossing, no whispered fears. Just my daughter, whole. She'd opened the window earlier, not just for air, but for life, for the unknown, for whatever would come next. And unlike before, she wasn't afraid. I didn't close it. Instead, I pulled the blanket up over her shoulder and kissed her temple. As I turned to leave, I whispered, "You made it, baby. You really made it." Because sometimes the most profound victories aren't announced. They're felt, in quiet rooms, in open windows, in the stillness of a woman who finally knows her worth. The following week, Melissa stood by the garden again. The tulips had opened. Delicate petals stretched toward the sun in shades of blush, white and deep purple, colors she hadn't planned but welcomed. She knelt beside them, running her fingers gently across the bloom. "They're late," she said. I smiled. "Or maybe they're right on time." She looked up at me, eyes shining. "I used to think everything had to happen by a certain age. Love, marriage, children. And now? Now I just want it to happen when it's real." She brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I'm not in a rush anymore. I want to wake up slowly, to build something solid, not just something that looks good in pictures." We sat on the old bench nearby, the one her father built before he passed. It creaked beneath us like a familiar song. Sometimes I think about how close I was to giving all of me to someone who only wanted the version he could control, she said. And I'm just grateful. I took her hand. "You bloomed late, maybe, but oh, how strong you are." She squeezed my fingers, then turned to the flowers again. One tulip bent slightly in the wind but did not break. Like her, like so many women before her. She smiled. "Maybe I'll plant more next year. You'll be here to see them," I said. And I knew she would, blooming again and again. That night I stood at the foot of the stairs looking up at Melissa's room. Her light was on, soft, golden, not fluorescent or harsh, but the kind of glow that made a house feel like home. The kind of light you leave on for someone who's finding their way back. I didn't call out to her. I just stood there, hand resting on the banister, heart full. She was up there writing again, a new story, this time her own. Not one dictated by shame or timelines, not shaped by someone else's gaze. Outside, the wind had quieted. The house was still, but inside, something sacred had returned. The light, not just in her room, but in her. She left the door cracked open and the scent of a new candle drifted down. Lavender and cedar. Grounding, warm. She'd become a woman who wasn't afraid of silence. A woman who danced barefoot, planted things that took time, and wrote her healing line by line. As I turned toward my own room, I looked back once more. The window glowed softly in the dark, a beacon for no one but herself. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was living. Respect isn't something you earn once. It's something you reclaim every time someone tries to take it away.